The day they told me my husband was dead. My son asked me where the house papers were. I remember the sound of the kettle more than anything else, how it shrieked on the stove, sharp and impatient, while Derek stood in my kitchen pretending not to notice my hands shaking. The kettle had always been Walter's job. He believed tea should be made with patience, not urgency. That morning, I let it scream until the steam fogged the window, and my chest felt too tight to breathe. I was 68 years old, widowed on paper, and already being measured for what little space I would be allowed to occupy next. Derek didn't look at me when he asked. He kept his eyes on the counter, on the stack of unopened condolence cards, on the framed photo of Walter and me from our 35th anniversary. Bianca stood near the doorway, arms crossed, her mouth pressed into a thin line that tried to look sympathetic and failed. "Mom," Derek said gently, the way people speak to strangers in hospitals. "We should probably start organizing things, just to be prepared." Prepared? For what? I wondered. For my grief to inconvenience them? For my life to be folded up and boxed away like out-of-season clothes? I nodded because nodding was easier than speaking. My throat felt raw, like I'd been crying for days, which I had, but there was something else lodged there too. A quiet confusion I couldn't name yet. A feeling that the room was tilted, that I was standing on a floor that no longer trusted me. Walter had been gone officially for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the closed casket, the murmured prayers, the firm handshakes. 3 weeks since Bianca had taken it upon herself to reorganize my pantry, and Derek had begun speaking to me in careful, slow sentences, as if I might shatter if spoken to too quickly. Before all of this, my life had been small but full. I woke early, watered the roses Walter planted along the fence, fed the birds that gathered on the telephone wire like gossiping neighbors. On Wednesdays, I volunteered at the church thrift shop. On Sundays, Walter and I shared a late breakfast, reading the paper side by side, our legs touching under the table. Our house held the quiet weight of years' scratches on the doorframe marking Derek's height, a dent in the hallway wall from when Walter tried to carry in a bookshelf by himself. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Every creak had a memory. Every window knew our faces. After Walter's death, the house felt watched. Not by ghosts or memories, by people. By Derek and Bianca, who came by unannounced, moving through rooms as if already rehearsing their ownership. Bianca would open drawers, comment on the clutter, suggest renovations that made no sense unless she planned to stay. "You shouldn't be alone so much," she told me once, rearranging my silverware without asking. "It's not good for someone in your condition." "What condition?" I asked. She smiled too quickly. "You know, after a shock like this, it was a small thing, that word condition, but it landed heavy." I noticed how Derek's eyes flicked toward her, then back to me, measuring my reaction. I laughed it off, told myself grief makes people awkward. Told myself I was imagining the tension. That was my mistake. I had spent a lifetime smoothing things over, believing love meant patience. Walter used to say I had a gift for seeing the best in people. Now, alone in our bedroom, his pillows still smelling faintly of aftershave and clean cotton, I wondered if that gift had finally made me blind. The first night Derek suggested I might need help, I was standing at the sink, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. "Mom," he said softly, "Bianca and I have been talking." I didn't turn around. "About what?" "About you. About whether this house is safe for you anymore." I felt my spine stiffen. "I've lived here 40 years. I know, he said quickly. "But things change. You forget things sometimes." I dried my hands slowly, deliberately. "Everyone forgets things." Bianca stepped in then, her heels clicking like punctuation. "You left the stove on last week." "No, I didn't," I said. "The igniter sticks. Walter was going to fix it." She exchanged a look with Derek, the kind that's meant to be invisible but never is. The kind that says, "See?" That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. The clock in the hallway ticked too loudly. The refrigerator hummed. I tried to remember if I'd left the stove on, tried to recall every small misstep of the past month, stacking them like evidence against myself. Grief does strange things to memory. It blurs the edges. I told myself that was all this was. Grief, and a son who cared too much. Then the letter arrived. It was cream-colored, heavy paper. My name typed neatly at the center. The return address made my stomach tighten. Croft and Associates. Nathaniel Croft had been Walter's boss for over 20 years. A serious man, sharp-eyed, always smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Walter spoke of him with respect, even admiration. After the funeral, I'd received a brief card from Croft, formal condolences. Nothing more. This letter was different. "Mrs. Shepherd," it began. "I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you in person regarding a matter Walter entrusted to me. Please come to my office at your earliest convenience." I read it twice, then again. There was no mention of condolences, No softening language, just a request. A summons. When I showed it to Derek, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You don't need to go running around," he said. "I can handle anything work-related." "It's addressed to me," I replied. Bianca leaned against the counter, arms folded. "It might be overwhelming. With everything you're dealing with." There it was again. That careful concern. That gentle insistence that I was fragile. "I'll be fine," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. That night, I packed my purse with unnecessary things, lipstick I wouldn't wear. A folded grocery list, Walter's old pen. I slept poorly, dreaming of locked doors and voices speaking just out of reach. In the morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, studying my face for signs of the woman they seemed to think I was becoming. I saw grief. Yes, lines carved deeper by sorrow, but I also saw clarity. Resolve. Whatever Walter had left behind, whatever truth waited in Nathaniel Croft's office, I knew one thing as I locked the front door behind me. My life was being rewritten without my consent, and I intended to read every word. Nathaniel Croft's office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building that reflected the sky so cleanly it felt like stepping into a different weather system. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft whir of cables and my own breathing, shallow and measured, like I was trying not to disturb something fragile inside my chest. The receptionist greeted me by name before I could speak. That alone unsettled me. "Mr. Croft is expecting you, Mrs. Shepherd," she said, standing with a politeness that felt practiced. "Right this way." The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Each step echoed more loudly than it should have, my sensible shoes betraying my nerves. When she opened the door to his office, I half expected to see Walter sitting there, jacket draped over the chair, glasses perched low on his nose, pretending to read while listening to every word. Instead, Nathaniel Croft stood behind his desk, hands folded, posture rigid. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe grief had sharpened my eyes. "Gloria," he said, stepping forward. He did not offer condolences. He did not offer a hug. He gestured to the chair across from him and waited until I sat. For a long moment, he said nothing. He studied my face as if checking it against a memory. Then he reached into a drawer and placed a thin folder on the desk between us. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to answer honestly. Have you been evaluated for cognitive decline in the past 6 months?" The question landed like a slap. "No," I said. "Of course not." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Has anyone suggested that you might be unwell?" My fingers curled around the handle of my purse. "My son and his wife have expressed concerns." "Have they?" he murmured. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies, medical forms, typed notes, signatures. My name appeared again and again, attached to words that made my vision blur. "Early stage dementia, disorientation, impaired judgment." I shook my head, a hollow laugh escaping before I could stop it. "This is a mistake." Nathaniel's voice was steady, but his eyes were not unkind. "These documents were submitted to a financial advisory firm 2 weeks after Walter's passing. They authorized Derek Shepherd as your legal decision-maker. I never signed these." "I know," he said simply. My heart began to race. The room felt too warm, the air too thick. "Then why?" "Because Walter came to me before he disappeared," Nathaniel said. I froze. "Disappeared?" He exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. "Before his death was reported." The words swam. "Walter is dead." Nathaniel did not correct me. Instead, he reached for another file. Thicker, heavier. He opened it carefully, as though it contained something fragile. "Walter suspected that Derek and Bianca were planning to declare you incompetent," he said. "Not because you are, but because it would give them control over your assets. The house, the savings, everything. My first instinct was to defend them, to laugh it off, to insist my son would never. But the images flooded back. Bianca in my pantry, Derek's careful voice, the way they looked at each other when I spoke. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would Walter think that?" "Because he found evidence," Nathaniel said. "Forged medical records, email correspondence, meetings with a private geriatric evaluator who never met you." My mouth tasted metallic. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the uneven thud of my heart. "And the reason I asked you here," he continued, "is because Walter asked me to protect you if anything happened to him." The room seemed to tilt. "Protect me from what?" "From being erased," he said quietly. I stared at the papers, at my own name twisted into something unrecognizable. I thought of all the times I had doubted myself these past weeks, all the moments I had stood in a room and wondered if I was losing my grip. That doubt, it hadn't been an accident. It had been planted. Tears slid down my face without warning. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a slow, steady release. He was trying to warn me, I said, and I didn't listen. Nathaniel leaned forward. Gloria, there's more. He hesitated, then spoke with care. Walter did not die of natural causes. I sucked in a breath. What are you saying? I'm saying his death was staged, he replied. The words felt absurd. Offensive. I almost laughed again. That's impossible. Walter is not a reckless man, Nathaniel said. He believed that if he confronted Derek directly, the evidence would disappear. Or worse. So we devised a plan. My ears rang. You're telling me my husband faked his own death. I'm telling you he went into hiding to document their actions, he said, and to see how far they would go. My hands trembled now, uncontrollably. Grief, anger, hope everything collided at once. Why wouldn't he tell me? I demanded. Why would he let me think he was gone? Because he believed they were watching you, Nathaniel said. And because he didn't trust that they wouldn't manipulate you into revealing the truth. The door behind me creaked. I turned just as Derek's voice cut through the room. Mom? Bianca stood beside him, her eyes sharp, calculating. Too alert for people who were merely concerned. What's going on? Derek asked, forcing a smile. Nathaniel rose slowly from his chair. Everything, he said. I felt something settle inside me then. A quiet, unshakable certainty. Whatever happened next, I was done being spoken for. Derek's smile wavered the moment he realized Nathaniel Croft wasn't surprised to see him. Mr. Croft, he said, extending a hand that hung awkwardly in the air. We didn't expect to find you, alone with my mother. Bianca didn't offer a greeting. Her eyes were on the folder in front of me, then on my face, searching for damage, measuring how much I knew. I invited Mrs. Shepherd, Nathaniel said calmly. He did not take Derek's hand. You were not invited. Derek's jaw tightened. Mom, are you okay? That question, so carefully practiced, used to comfort me. Now it felt like a test. I'm fine, I said. My voice surprised even me. It didn't tremble. Why are you here? Bianca stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Derek's arm. We were worried when you didn't answer your phone, she said. You forget to charge it sometimes. I didn't forget, I replied. I turned it off. Silence spread across the room like a spill. Derek laughed softly. See? This is what we mean. You don't need to get defensive. Nathaniel cleared his throat. Perhaps you'd like to explain these documents. He slid the folder toward them. Bianca's eyes flicked down for half a second long enough. I don't know what those are, Derek said too quickly. You should, Nathaniel replied. They bear your wife's email signature. Bianca's hand dropped from Derek's arm. I was only trying to help, she said, her voice shifting, smoothing itself into something softer. Gloria has been through so much. Anyone would be confused after losing their husband. I flinched at the word losing. Not because of grief, because of the lie wrapped inside it. I never saw a doctor, I said quietly. So how did they diagnose me? Bianca opened her mouth, then closed it. Derek stepped in. We didn't think you'd understand, he said. You've been fragile. We were protecting you. By taking my house? I asked. That house is a burden, he snapped, the mask slipping for just a moment. You can't manage it alone. I've managed it longer than you've been alive. Nathaniel watched them both with the stillness of a man who already knew how this would unfold. Mrs. Shepherd, he said gently. May I? I nodded. He pressed a button on his desk. The screen on the wall behind him flickered to life. Emails appeared, dates, times, messages between Derek and Bianca discussing timelines, legal steps, contingencies. One line burned itself into my memory. Once she's declared incompetent, it's clean. She won't even know what she's signed away. My breath caught. My vision blurred. Derek turned toward Bianca. You said you deleted these. I thought I did, she hissed. So, Nathaniel said, you planned this for months. Bianca straightened, chin lifting. We did what was necessary. Necessary? I whispered. To destroy my mind on paper? You're old, she snapped. And sentimental. Walter would have wasted everything trying to protect you. That was when something inside me went very still. You don't get to speak his name, I said. Derek rubbed his face, frustration bleeding through. Mom, please, let's go home. This is getting you upset. No, Nathaniel said firmly. You're not going anywhere. Derek looked at him sharply. You don't have that authority. Nathaniel met his gaze. On the contrary, I've already contacted counsel and the authorities. Bianca laughed a brittle sound. You think anyone will believe an old woman over us? Nathaniel pressed another button. The screen changed. Audio played. Bianca's voice. Un mistacabel. If we push hard enough, she'll start doubting herself. Old people do. My hands clenched in my lap. That doubt, that slow erosion of trust in my own mind finally had a name. Derek stared at the screen, his face draining of color. You recorded us? Walter did, Nathaniel said. The room seemed to contract around that name. Derek swallowed. That's impossible. The door behind us opened again. Footsteps. Familiarones. Slow. Steady. I knew the rhythm of them, the way you know a heartbeat. Before my mind could catch up, my body reacted. I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, I breathed. No, this isn't. Walter stepped into the room. Alive. Older, somehow. Thinner. But unmistakably my husband. Standing there with his shoulders squared and his eyes fixed on our son. The world narrowed to the sound of my own pulse. Derek staggered back a step. Bianca let out a sharp, broken sound. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. Walter's voice was calm, almost sad. I needed to see what you'd do without me in the way. I crossed the room without remembering how my feet moved. I touched his arms solid, warm, real. Anger surged up behind the relief, fierce and immediate. You let me bury you, I said, my voice breaking at last. I know, he replied softly, and I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you. Nathaniel spoke then, grounding us all. This meeting is being documented. Everything said here will be submitted. Derek's eyes darted between us, panic setting in. Dad, we can explain. Walter shook his head. No, you've explained enough. Bianca's composure cracked. You can't do this to us, she said. We're family. Walter looked at her the way one looks at a stranger who has overstayed their welcome. Family doesn't erase someone while they're still breathing, he said. I stood between my husband and my son, feeling the weight of that truth settle into my bones. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a choice they had made again and again. And now, they would have to live with it. For a long moment after Walter spoke, no one moved. The air felt charged, like a room just before a storm breaks, every breath heavy, every sound magnified. Derek was the first to recover. This is insane, he said, running a hand through his hair. You faked your own death. Do you have any idea what that did to Mom? Walter didn't flinch. I do. That's why I'm standing here now. Bianca stepped forward, eyes blazing. You humiliated us, she said. You let people mourn you. That's sick. Nathaniel's voice cut through hers, even and unyielding. What's sick is systematically attempting to strip a woman of her legal identity while she's of sound mind. I finally found my voice again. It came out low, steady, nothing like the woman they've been trying to paint me as. How long? I asked Derek. How long have you been planning this? He looked away. That was answer enough. Since the surgery, Bianca said coldly. After Walter's heart scare. We knew then that everything would fall to you. My stomach turned. I remembered that hospital room, Walter pale, me holding his hand. Derek and Bianca whispering in the corner. You were already measuring me for a coffin, I said. Just like you did him. That's not fair, Derek snapped. We thought you'd fall apart. We thought we were being practical. Walter stepped closer to him. You thought you were entitled? Derek's shoulders slumped, anger giving way to something smaller. Fear. Nathaniel gathered the folders, stacking them neatly. The evidence is comprehensive. Forgery, financial exploitation, coercive control. Bianca scoffed. She's old. She won't press charges. I lifted my chin. You don't get to decide what I will or won't do. That finally made her look at me, not past me, not around me, at me. Walter placed a hand at the small of my back, grounding me. His presence felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a house after a fire and finding the walls still standing. Derek's voice dropped. Dad, please. Walter shook his head. I didn't raise you to do this. Nathaniel moved toward the door. I'll give you a moment, he said to us quietly. But be aware, security is already involved. When he left, the silence felt unbearable. Derek's eyes filled. Mom, I was scared. You've always been strong. And then suddenly you decided I couldn't be trusted. I finished. Bianca stepped between us. If anyone's to blame, it's him, she said sharply. He didn't stop me. That was the moment I understood her completely. You chose each other, I said. Every lie, every signature. You chose that. Walter's voice softened. We gave you everything we had. Derek collapsed into the chair, head in his hands. Bianca stood rigid, defiant, even now. I want you to leave, I said. Bianca laughed bitterly. This isn't over. It is, I replied. For me. Nathaniel returned then, flanked by 2 men in suits. Derek looked up, eyes wild. "Mom," he said desperately. "Tell them it's a misunderstanding." I met his gaze and felt something painful but necessary settle inside me. "No," I said. "It's the truth." They were escorted out separately. Bianca didn't look back. Derek did once. That look will stay with me for the rest of my life. When the door finally closed, I sagged against Walter. "I don't know how to feel," I whispered. "You don't have to know yet," he said. "Just breathe." The days that followed moved strangely slow and fast all at once. Lawyers, statements, a quiet flurry of official voices confirming what I already knew. My mind was intact, my rights restored, my life mine again. The house felt different when Walter and I returned. Larger, quieter, as if it had been holding its breath too. We sat at the kitchen table late that night, hands wrapped around mugs gone cold. "I thought I was losing myself," I said. "I started believing them." Walter reached across the table, his fingers warm around mine. "Gaslighting works because it preys on love." "I don't know how to forgive," I admitted. "You don't have to," he said gently. "You just have to stop letting it hurt you." We made decisions carefully, without anger. We sold the house not because we were pushed, but because we were ready. We chose a smaller place near the coast, where mornings smelled like salt and coffee, and no one knew our history. Derek tried to call once. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Some wounds don't heal by reopening. They heal by being left alone. The town by the coast didn't ask questions. That was the first thing I noticed after we moved. No one leaned in too close at the grocery store. No one spoke to me in careful, hushed tones. The cashier rang up my apples and bread like I was just another woman with a list and a life. It felt like breathing fresh air after months in a sealed room. Our new house was smaller, white siding, blue shutters, a narrow porch that caught the morning light. You could hear the ocean if you stood still long enough. Not loudly, just enough to remind you that the world keeps moving. Walter took to the place immediately. He woke early again, the way he used to, and walked the shoreline with a thermos of coffee. Sometimes I watched him from the window, still half afraid he might vanish if I blinked too long. Trust, once cracked, doesn't repair itself all at once even when love remains. I spent my mornings arranging the kitchen, deciding where things belonged. It sounds simple, but there's something deeply comforting about choosing where your life sits. Each drawer I organized felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. The legal matters unfolded quietly. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no raised voices, just papers signed, rights reaffirmed, and a firm line drawn in ink between what had been done and what would never happen again. Derek pled through his attorney. Bianca did not. When I heard she was contesting the charges, I felt a familiar knot tighten in my chest. Old instincts defend, explain, soften rose up. Walter noticed immediately. "You don't owe them peace," he said one evening as we sat on the porch. The sky streaked pink and gold. "I know," I said. "But I keep thinking, he's still our son." Walter nodded slowly. "And you're still his mother. That doesn't mean you have to bleed for him." Those words settled into me more deeply than any apology ever could. A month after the move, I received a letter. Derek's handwriting. Shaky, uneven. He wrote about fear, about Bianca's influence, about regret. He didn't write about me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not thrown away, not answered, just set aside. That was my boundary. Walter never pushed me either way. He understood something I was still learning, that forgiveness is not the same as access. Sometimes healing means closing the door gently, without slamming it. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of our boxes, I found the old photo album from our anniversary. I sat on the floor, paging through faces frozen in happier years. "There," Walter said, pointing. "That one." It was a picture of me laughing, head thrown back, eyes closed. I barely recognized her. "I miss her," I said. Walter crouched beside me. "She's still here, just wiser." That night, I dreamed not of locked rooms or whispered voices, but of water moving over stones. Slow, steady, unstoppable. The case concluded quietly. Derek accepted a settlement that included strict no-contact terms. Bianca lost her professional license when the forgery charges became public. There was no joy in that knowledge, just a sense of balance restored. Justice, I learned, doesn't shout. It hums. The first time I planted flowers in our new garden, my hands sank into damp earth, and I cried without quite knowing why. Grief still lived in me, not for Walter, who sat alive behind me, but for the version of myself who had almost been convinced she was disappearing. I stood, brushing dirt from my palms, and felt something rare and precious. Confidence. That evening, Walter poured us 2 glasses of wine. We sat on the porch, watching the sky darken. We could travel, he said lightly. Do all the things we postponed. I smiled. I just want quiet. He laughed softly. Then quiet it is. In the months that followed, I found myself again in small ways. Learning the names of neighbors, joining a book club, walking without checking my phone. No one questioned my memory. No one suggested I was fading, and I stopped questioning myself. One morning, as the sun rose over the water, I realized something else too, something harder, but true. Betrayal doesn't end a life. Doute does, and I had survived both. The truth, once spoken aloud, has a way of traveling farther than you expect. We hadn't told anyone in our new town the full story, only fragments, softened at the edges. That we'd moved for a fresh start. That family matters had grown complicated. People nodded, accepting those answers the way polite strangers do. But back where we came from, the story did not stay quiet. I learned that when my phone rang one afternoon and the caller ID showed a church friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "Gloria," she said, her voice hushed but urgent. "Is it true?" I closed my eyes. "What have you heard?" "That Derek and Bianca were charged. That you weren't sick at all." I sat down slowly. "It's true." There was a pause. Then softly, "I'm so sorry." The next weeks brought more calls. Old neighbors, distant relatives, people who had watched me be guided by the elbow, spoken about in whispers. Some apologized. Some said nothing but sounded ashamed. I accepted the apologies that came without excuses. I let the silence stand where it didn't. Walter watched all of this from a careful distance. "They're seeing what you already lived," he said. "At Derek's plea hearing, I chose not to attend. That decision surprised even me." "Don't you want to see him held accountable?" a friend asked gently. I shook my head. "I want to stay whole." Nathaniel Croft went in my place, representing my interests with the same steady integrity he always had. When he called afterward, his voice was measured. "The judge was clear," he said. "The record will reflect what they did." That was enough. The public consequence didn't arrive as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow unraveling. Bianca's professional circle withdrew first. Invitations stopped. Then work. Then credibility. Derek lost something less visible, but just as real the story he'd told himself about being a good son. I imagine that's the hardest thing to live with. We were asked once quietly if we wanted to give a statement. To share our experience. Walter looked at me, waiting. I shook my head. "My life is not a cautionary tale," I said. "It's mine." Instead, I wrote a letter to the local senior center in our old town, offering to volunteer from a distance to help educate others about financial and emotional abuse among families. No names, no faces, just information. They accepted gratefully. Helping anonymously felt right, like turning pain into something useful without letting it define me. Back home, the ocean continued its steady work. I learned its moods. When it was restless, when it was kind. I learned to listen again to myself most of all. One afternoon, Walter came back from a walk holding an envelope. "It came to the old address," he said. "Forwarded." I knew before I opened it. "Derek, this letter was shorter. No explanations. Just one line. I know you may never forgive me, but I see now what I almost destroyed." I held it for a long time. Then I placed it beside the first, closed the drawer, and locked it. Not forever. Just for now. Some lessons take longer to settle. That evening, we hosted neighbors for dinner. Simple food. Laughter. Stories exchanged over clinking glasses. At one point, I caught Walter watching me with that familiar look, the one that says, "Here you are." Later, after everyone left, I washed the dishes while he dried. "You know," he said, "you're lighter." I smiled. I stopped carrying things that weren't mine. Before bed, I stood by the window, listening to the surf. I thought about the woman I had been doubting, apologizing, shrinking. I thought about the woman I was becoming. Age, I realized, doesn't make you invisible. It makes you dangerous to lies, to manipulation, to anyone who thinks time has weakened you. I turned off the light and slipped into bed beside my husband, alive and warm and real. For the first time in a long while, I slept without guarding myself. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, in moments so ordinary you almost miss them. One morning, it was the sound of Walter humming while he made coffee off-key, the way he'd always done. Another day, it was the realization that I'd gone hours without replaying the past in my head. I began to trust the calm. That surprised me most of all. For so long, peace had felt suspicious, like the quiet before something went wrong. Now, it felt earned. We fell into a rhythm that belonged only to us. Morning walks, afternoons with books open but unread, the ocean doing most of the talking. Evenings where we cooked together, bumping hips in the small kitchen, laughing when one of us forgot the salt. Sometimes, grief still brushed against me, not sharp, not consuming but gentle, like a reminder of what could have been lost. I let it pass without fighting it. One afternoon, while reorganizing a hall closet, I found the box I'd labeled old papers. Inside were copies of the forged documents, the evaluations that never happened, the signatures that weren't mine. For a moment, my chest tightened. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I fed them into the shredder. Not angrily, methodically. The machine hummed, paper curling into thin, useless strips. Each page vanished, and with it, a little more of the power it once held over me. When I was done, I stood there breathing in the scent of warm paper and dust. Walter appeared in the doorway. He didn't ask. He just nodded. That night, we really talked about the months we'd lost to fear and secrecy. I hated lying to you, he said quietly. Every day. I hated thinking I was losing my mind, I replied. We held hands in the dark, acknowledging the damage without letting it define us. That mattered. Spring arrived softly. Flowers bloomed in the small garden I'd planted. Neighbors waved by name. I joined a weekly walking group not because I needed company, but because I wanted it. I noticed something else too. I spoke up more. If someone interrupted me, I continued anyway. If a decision needed to be made, I made it. There was no apology in my voice. Confidence, it turns out, is a muscle, and mine had grown stronger under pressure. One morning, I received a call from the senior center. They wanted me to speak anonymously still, but live about recognizing manipulation in families. I hesitated. Then I agreed. I didn't tell my whole story. I didn't need to. I spoke about signs, the way concern can become control, how love should never require you to disappear. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was younger than me, but her eyes held the same confusion I'd once carried. Thank you, she said. I thought it was just me. I went home that day with a quiet sense of purpose. Later that week, Walter and I drove along the coast, windows down, the air salty and cool. I'm proud of you, he said. I smiled. I'm proud of us. We passed a sign for an assisted living community. Months ago, it would have tightened my throat. Now, it didn't. Not because I'd never need help one day, but because I knew the difference between care and control. That distinction changed everything. On our anniversary, we returned to the beach at sunset. Walter took my hand, his thumb tracing the familiar line of my knuckles. We lost time, he said softly. We gained truth, I replied. He kissed my forehead, and in that moment, I felt complete, not untouched by pain, but shaped by it in a way that felt honest. I thought of Derek then not with anger, but with clarity. He had chosen a path, and so had I. Mine led forward, toward quiet mornings, toward dignity, toward a life that belonged to me. People often ask me now how I found the strength to walk away from my own child. They ask it softly, like strength is something you either have or you don't like. It arrived fully formed one morning and stayed. But the truth is, strength didn't come first. Clarity did. I didn't wake up brave. I woke up tired of doubting my own mind, tired of shrinking to make other people comfortable, tired of confusing love with sacrifice. What I learned too late for some moments, but in time for my life is this. Anyone who needs you to disappear so they can thrive is not protecting you. They are replacing you. Age does not make us weak. Grief does not make us incapable. And love, real love, never requires paperwork to erase your voice. Walter and I didn't choose revenge. We chose peace. We chose distance over destruction, truth over performance, dignity over blood ties that have forgotten what blood means. Some people will tell you family is everything. I believe family is sacred, but only when it is safe. Today, I wake up beside a man who saw the danger before I did. In a home where no one questions my memory, my worth, or my right to choose. The ocean reminds me every day that life keeps moving forward, whether we're ready or not. And so do I. If you're listening to this, and something in your chest feels tight, if someone keeps telling you that you're confused, forgetful, or too much for wanting control over your own life, please hear me. You are not disappearing. You are being pushed, and you are allowed to step back. Would you have done what I did? Would you have chosen peace over people who share your name? Tell me in the comments, and if this story spoke to you, stay with us here because some truths are easier to face when we face them together.